For me, there's not a lot of rocket science in what I'm going to talk about tonight, and there's also quite a lot of personal opinion. So I wouldn't expect that everybody in the room will necessarily agree with everything I say, which is fantastic. And I really would encourage you, if you do have any sort of questions when we get to the end of the presentation, to please shout up, because I'd love to engage in some discussion and debate. So what I thought would be helpful to sort of talk through is just a little bit of positioning about Bankwest and the journey that we've been on over the last few years. But perhaps more interesting, given the audience here, is what we see is that emerging vision for financial services and the industry. And when I say emerging, some of you may actually argue that it's actually already here, but to a lesser or greater extent. But then more importantly, in the context of that emerging vision, what are the real leadership and cultural enablers that are going to be critical for organisations to be successful in the future, to really take advantage of that changing environment? And then, of course, we'll have an opportunity for questions afterwards. I should also point out, as I think Fred rightly pointed out, I'm not a technologist by trade. This is my first role in technology. I actually believe that to be a virtue, rather than a hindrance. Some of my colleagues might disagree, but again, as we go through, I'll hopefully reinforce why I believe that to be the case. So a little bit about Bankwest, and I'll skip through this pretty quickly, but we are a national player. It is a little bit of a myth to think that we are a West Coast organisation that's playing a little bit on the East Coast. I'm not going to go through all the numbers there, but you pretty much see that from an assets, liability and customer perspective, we're pretty well split, about 50-50 across both coasts. Just some sort of idea of the scale of the organisation. I know some of you are in financial services, but just to give you a sense to compare with your own businesses. In my technology and operations space, we've got about 1,500 colleagues. We support 1.2 million customers. We have around about 200 physical points of distribution across Australia, largely around the metropolitan areas. We process around about 3 million work items a day. And we have a largely in-sourced technology model, which, again, I believe affords us some advantages. Just a little bit of a history lesson, I guess, for Bankwest, because it hasn't always been that sort of national picture. This was the situation in 2006, and as you can see, a really heavy skew in terms of distribution in terms of the West Coast. And it was at that point that the bank really set about its aspirations to really become more of a national player. Now, in determining that, we had to really think about our heritage. Here are some sort of fantastic pictures that I always love to share with people in terms of the really deep heritage we have in WA. And interesting, I don't know if the actual thing, oh yes, it does work. We've always sort of been very, very proud of our innovation. I'm told we were the first organisation in the Southern Hemisphere to open an ATM. And this was an innovation in the 1950s. It was a drive-through bank, which some of you may have actually seen that some banks in the States do something similar. So that was an innovation we had in Inaloo. It was also the most robbed bank in Australia. Obvious reasons, the getaway car is parked absolutely perfectly. So it didn't last too long. They were also the first female tellers that we employed. So in terms of that expansion, then through 2007-11 really was a massive kind of investment from our then parent to really set about developing a unique customer experience in retail banking. That's a sort of photo of one of our East Coast stores. The demographic of this room, I doubt, are the types of people that really shop in our stores, but that whole process has been very, very successful from our perspective. And the position in 2012, as you can see, suddenly you start to see a much heavier physical distribution penetration on the East Coast than we had in 2006. We continue to innovate in physical distribution. I know there'll be a lot of you sort of probably stood there thinking, isn't the future all about mobile while you're still playing around with physical distribution? Happy to sort of talk about that in a bit more detail, but we passionately and fervently believe in that. We don't believe you can grow a brand without physical distribution. It's about the size and scale of that. So what we're doing at the moment, we're now sort of very much down the path of what we call either a mini store or a kiosk concept. We actually opened our most recent one in High Point in Victoria last week, which is open 24/7. And these things, just to give you some idea of the economics, you know, we can deliver the full store revenues at around about 30% of the cost, and for that size of footprint. And for those of you who say, well, nobody would ever apply for a mortgage in that kind of context, I can absolutely assure you that they do. The other thing in terms of physical distribution, the world is changing, for years I think a lot of financial services organisations have tried to dumb down their stores and their physical distribution and shifted the administrative and technical queries away from that front line to really make them sales outlets. Our latest store, and this is our Perth CBD, we've stolen an idea unashamedly from Apple, in that we've actually put an expert bar in the store, because there is no doubt that store transactions are dwindling. That's happening across the industry, but there is still it's actually a changing environment. What people want from their store is a point of presence where they can actually go and buttonhole somebody and talk to them where they have a problem. And people really, really value that. And that's actually the most used aspect of our physical distribution on the West Coast. We're also doing a lot of work in the digital space, which I'll come back to in a moment. And I think the people that will win in this industry are not just those that play in the digital space, but those people that actually integrate their channels effectively. Because to me, the mistake a lot of organisations make is that they build fiefdoms and silos around their channels, as opposed to really getting their channels talking to each other. From a customer, you don't care the method of access to that organisation, but you expect it to be consistent whichever way you go in. But as you can see, from a physical distribution perspective, we still have a way to go. So whilst we are doing some stuff that's pretty interesting, this is one of our sort of remote WA stores. It is a real one. So as you can see, it's not all sort of sexy and glamorous. So that's just a little bit, and apologies I rushed through that because you may well have some questions on that later, but that's just a little bit of our context. What I wanted to come on to talk about was what I see as the emerging sort of trends and changes in financial services. And people may argue to the extent of this, but I think what people are increasingly looking from a financial service provider is one or two things. I've just touched on the fact they want that seamless channel experience. They want to be able to sit at home on their iPad, sort of researching away the best mortgage deals. And if they want to actually apply for their mortgage while they're playing on the iPad watching Big Brother, they will do that. Equally, there will be people that want to come into the store to finalise that application. There might be some people that want to ring up or have a broker, a mobile banker come to their residence. But what they want is a seamless experience. They don't want to be pushed around and told that they can't do this in that channel and you can only do this in that channel. So I think from a consumer perspective, the demands are shifting considerably and the expectations are rising massively. The other thing I think increasingly that people want from financial services is this role of seeing as an enabler to enable them to do things. So the provision of tools and functions, whether that be digitally provided or through the stores, that makes life easier for them. So it's not about, going on your hands and knees to beg the bank manager for a mortgage as it might have been in the old days. It's more about what can you do, financial services industry, for me as a consumer to make my life easier. Why haven't you got an app that enables me to do X? Why can't I do this on my mobile? So I think those demands are unequivocally shifting. And I don't think there'll be many people that would sort of argue that that's the direction that we're moving towards. What does that mean in terms of service offerings as a purveyor of financial services? Well, a number of things. We've already touched on the fact that the physical store is changing. Now, as you can see, in Bankwest, we've decided to go in a different direction, and most other financial institutions are doing something different than the traditional store. But it's very, very clear that that shift is occurring. I touched also about the integration of channels. We believe that we're uniquely placed in Bankwest, that scale actually works for us. A lot of the bigger players are encumbered by the sort of legacy of building their organisation around their channels, and therefore getting people to work together is that more challenging because they have systemic issues. Mobiles and payments, I mean, again, I don't know, I'll do a show of hands normally on these things as to how many's got a smartphone, but I won't bother because I'm pretty sure most people will have. But it's undoubted. I was in the States earlier this year and met with some colleagues at Cisco, and they were explaining to me that Starbucks now have a sort of payments app that has seen they've gone from 0 to 22% of their sales of coffee through a mobile phone in less than 6 months. You know, that's a phenomenal rate of growth. Now, I know that's one proof point, but that is inevitably the path that we're on. So I think that area is set to absolutely explode with the onset of near-field communication technology. Social media is an interesting one, because we all like to talk about that, and we all think that, yeah, the future's social media, but I equally feel that financial services are still struggling to grapple how best to leverage that. And I think lots of people are doing some interesting things in that space, but I don't think anybody's nailed it yet. But I think undoubtedly, American election today, how many people in the room were actually following that through Twitter? Okay, so we're perhaps not a great sample size. So that's three people in the room anyway, obviously the progressive ones, so good to see you, gents. But interestingly, yeah, I didn't watch the TV once today, but I actually felt that I was completely up to speed with what was going on, getting feeds from CNN, BBC, et cetera, you know, through social media. So that has an increasingly important part to play. However, Gen Y, we think it is going to become the future way that we communicate, and financial services organisations have to embrace that. I think some of the other interesting things, this concept of segment of one. So gone are the days of sort of mass market marketing and really being able to really drill down using some big data capabilities to provide you with a specific offer for you as an individual, as opposed to something that's a blanket approach that covers the whole of a particular segment of the market. I think will become increasingly important as the world goes on. The importance of digital identity and people looking to financial services organisations as being the protectors of that as this world inevitably starts to unfold around us. So I'm keen to move on. So if you buy this emerging value proposition, if you buy that these are the types of offerings and things that financial services players are increasingly going to have to provide, for me anyway, that throws up a number of the sort of leadership and organisational enablers that will become critical. For me, I'm talking about financial services, but equally I think I could be talking about many, many industries. And I'm going to drill into these in a little more detail. But firstly, the importance of having an integrated business and technology strategy. And look, everybody talks about that, but I'm always amazed as to how divergent a technology strategy is from a business strategy. And I would say it's actually the exception that is really tightly integrated. And that's one of the things that I believe is a virtue from being a business leader in a technology role, because you really have to drive your technology function to become integrated with where the business is trying to get to, and less about getting excited about the technology itself. The second point around the importance of having a collaborative culture, which again I'll talk about in more detail. And then thirdly, really having innovation and agility within your DNA of an organisation. Now, we all like to talk about innovation and agility. They really are the buzzwords. But for me, the people that will be successful in that, and therefore why it's such a leadership challenge, are the ones that can really embed that in the fabric of their organisation, as opposed to it being a buzzword or a little initiative that's going on in the corner. And I'll talk about some of the ways that we've tried to do that within Bankwest. And then finally, the importance of continuing to drive both organisational and employee productivity. So just drilling into those in a bit more detail. Firstly, in this whole concept of the integrated business and tech strategy, again, I'm always amazed still as to how many technology leaders I speak to who refer to the business in the third person, you know, which for me is just ridiculous. You know, technology is part of the business that they're there to actually support and deliver for. So for me, one of the big challenges that I had moving into this role is really to shift mindsets away from my job's to keep the lights on or my job's to build X, Y, Z, and really see that everybody's job is to actually meet what the customer or organisational outcomes are for that organisation. Now, don't stand there and think that, you know, I'm really clever and we've been great at that. That's bloody hard. Very, very hard to shift that sort of paradigm. But for me, it's absolutely fundamental. You know, and the whole concept of people working in technology, realising there's an end customer and an outcome that the organisation is trying to achieve is really, really fundamental to me. You know, things like shared KPIs are a statement of the bleeding obvious, but to me, they are really, really powerful. You know, again, moving into the organisation a few years ago, the KPIs of the technology team bore no resemblance to the organisational goals. So that was very much a free kick in terms of being able to change it quickly. Culturally, much harder, but in terms of the mechanics of changing KPIs, very, very straightforward. In terms of the collaboration culture, just a few sort of thoughts here. Firstly, about the team itself. Some of you will maybe use IINet as your internet provider, and I spent some time talking with their leadership team a little while ago, and they were explaining to me they recruit all of their employees 100% on attitude. You know, so whilst there is a hurdle in terms of the technical skills that they're looking for, they recruit 100% on the attitude of the individuals they're looking at. Incredibly brave, but I think a really, really smart move. Because to me, if you're talking about cultural transformation and really turning organisations to think about the world differently, attitude becomes all the more important. If you're constantly trying to shift people from one paradigm to another, if you haven't got the right and enough of the right people around you who think in the same way, you are really going to make life difficult for yourself. So I think recruiting attitude is really, really important. And I recently appointed a new head of software development for our team, and we recruited that person from Lonely Planet. You know, deliberately, I mean, again, you know, obviously they had to make sure they were suitable in all the normal ways, but the attitude and the cultural background was absolutely the sort of breath of fresh air that we were sort of looking for to help propel forward our transformation. The next one is the sort of operating model. So again, I talked about this technology and the business, and I think if you talk in those terms about that yes, we want to share and we want to sort of be integrated and all the rest of it, but then if you've got an operating model that reinforces the precise opposite, then you're doomed to failure. So it's really, really important if you're going to talk about having an integrated business and technology model, technology strategy, that your model supports it. You know, so it's no good to me sort of setting up my resources in direct conflict to the business areas, which is why we've moved to a model whereby we actually implant direct reports of mine into those business lines that work as much for that business line as they do for me. And I think that's fundamentally important. We also have spent an awful lot of time and focus and effort changing the way that we work within Bankwest, and this is also something that we've done across the whole of the CBA group. So some of you will be familiar with the concept of activity-based working. I know those of you, some CBA colleagues here today will obviously know what that is, and I'll show you sort of some of the images of our new building in Perth. But that's a fundamental shift in the way that people work. And we've seen a massive uplift in colleague engagement and some of these other aspects as a result of people having no fixed desk. It is not hot desking. A lot of people sort of start to grab for something solid when I start to talk about activity-based working. I showed a group of consultants or partners from one of the big consulting firms. Some representatives might be here from the same firm, but I'll hold the name back to protect the innocent. And they were moving into this kind of environment, and I was explaining sort of just how it worked and how your locker size was sort of, you know, half a square metre. And it was kind of, well, where am I going to put all my certificates and my books and everything else? It's very, very confronting to leaders. But for me, fundamental if you're serious about embracing this, this emerging future. In terms of innovation and agility, so again, lots of organisations talk about this. Some of the things that we've tried, and I should say with all of this, you know, I'm not trying to appear smart and clever. We've made loads of cock-ups with this stuff, you know, and we're still very immature in a lot of these areas. But that's for us still not saying that it's not the right thing to do. So we're very, very passionate about moving forward across all of these things, but we've learned lots of lessons about how not to do things. So we're big supporters of agile development methodologies. So those of you that have been involved in sort of in systems development, traditionally things go through what we call the waterfall methodology, where, you know, the business come up with a set of requirements, they throw them over the wall to IT, they write their spec, they throw it over to the developers, they throw it to the testers, and then it gets implemented. And then the business at the end of the chain say, well, that wasn't really what I asked for. Now, we call that the relay race. Now, what Agile effectively does is collapses that whole value chain, and we call it a scrum. So you actually involve people throughout the value chain at every stage of the process of software development, and you build things in iterations. And what you actually find is that inevitably you finish projects much, much quicker because you get to the answer a lot quicker. We also launched something called ITO, which again, we stole from Google and Atlassian and other organizations. So you see here, we'll steal with pride from anybody. We're not kind of precious about things. And that's basically a scheme whereby people can book up to 20% of their time to work on innovation ideas. And in order to be able to actually do that, they have to find a business sponsor, at least 2 business sponsors for their idea, and then they can actually book that time and then work on that idea in their own time. So just to give, I don't know if anybody is a Bankwest customer in the room. It's interesting. Oh, one, thank you. We have a Bankwest app. I don't know if you have the Bankwest app on your smartphone, sir, but that Bankwest app on the smartphone was built through ITO, and it cost us $25,000 total to build the app. A guy did it one night at home. He just went home and think, I can build that app. And he went home and built it, came in and showed us the next day. 4 weeks later, it's in the App Store. You know, so that was a real big success for us, and we've had at least half a dozen things that have made it into production that have actually come through the ITO process. In terms of productivity, again, I don't know if there are any technologists in the room, but one of the things that always frustrated me when I wasn't in technology and frustrated me doubly when I got into technology was this whole concept that more volume equals more cost. It's almost like the law. You know, you want us to process more, you're going to deal with more, you know, get more widgets into the organisation, therefore A plus B equals C. And, you know, from our perspective, you know, smashing that sort of paradigm was fundamental. I see the challenge for any support function in any organisation is to constantly reduce its cost year on year and drive incremental value to the organisation, to really drive the jaws. And a lot of people struggle with that concept, but for me it's fundamental. We don't drive revenue for the organisation directly, we're a cost base. So I think our role is twofold: help the revenue driving parts of the business to drive more revenue and also reduce our cost base. And therefore we're widening the jaws of profitability to the organisation. Again, not rocket science for the people in this room, but for me, I think fundamental as a strategy. And I'm also a big believer in really employing a rigorous delivery focus. So what I mean by that is not quite delivery at all costs, but not quite far from it. That, you know, I saw, what's the famous stat, 80% of projects fail or something like that. Well, we get nowhere near that. You know, we really believe that we only back winners, and we're very good at stopping things when we're halfway through if we don't think it's going to work. And then I guess for me, across all of those things, and I suppose this is where we get into the sort of Cotter sort of change management side of things, but you know, the importance of doing the really simple things very, very well around leadership. Again, no rocket science. Over communicating around the things that you're doing, celebrating those successes, and making heroes of people that support this strategy. You know, so you know, the guy that built the iPhone app for us for 25 grand is a hero in our organisation. He's not somebody that got a pat on the back and a $50 gold class voucher. You know, he's an absolute hero for us, and that's really, really important for driving the culture that you want in the organisation. So just conscious of time, just wanted to cover off a couple of other examples of some of the bits I talked about. So this is an activity-based working environment, and as you can see, well, I think it's pretty funky. You might have your own views, but and once colleagues understand and appreciate the complete freedom of choice that they have in this type of working environment, it is phenomenal the amount of uplift that you see in colleague engagement and collaboration across the organisation. It is quite staggering. And before some of you might look at that and think, isn't that terribly extravagant? You know, this was a cost play for us as well. You know, by driving to an ABW environment, we were able to drop our floor footprint by around about 30%. You know, so the economics of this process work as well. And for me, personally, this is the way that all buildings will be and all workspaces will be in the next 5 to 10 years, undoubtedly. And some of the things that just go to support that, it is fully Wi-Fi connected, so people can physically work anywhere in the building, absolutely anywhere. We refer to it as paper independent. You know, so we haven't eliminated paper, but because you can connect your laptop at any point in the building or your iPad, you do not need to print things off. You know, people carry their laptops to meetings, their iPads to meetings, etc. So our printing costs and capabilities have been dropped dramatically. No fixed desks, as I've said, hundreds of collaboration spaces, and yeah, look, if anybody's ever in Perth, I'll be delighted to sort of show you around the building. We are very proud of it, and we've taken, I think, about 50 organisations through, and we've only sort of been open in about 6 months. So it is generating a lot of excitement. I did touch on Agile, but I'm just really conscious of the time, so I'll perhaps just cover off a couple of points on this. As to why did we go down the Agile route versus waterfall. And I suppose I'll just pick off one point here. There's a huge myth, I think, in the relationship between technology and the business. And those of you that sort of are involved in projects or ever been involved in systems projects will have heard things like, well, if you wanted that, you should have put it in your requirements. Or that wasn't in the scope, so we couldn't build it. Or why can't you make your mind up if you wanted that or you didn't want that? It's an absolute fallacy because the business never know everything that they want. And I can say that coming from the business because I used to be in that space. You know, typically the business have problems that need to be sorted. And often, and I would say in the majority of cases, people from the technology world are some of the smartest and most creative people in your organisation. But we leave them at point 5 and 6 in the value chain before we even get to them. And by the time things get to them there's a set of requirements that I'd like you to build. And I can tell you what they do. They sit there going, oh, well, I wouldn't do it like this. And they do that all day, and then at night they go home and they build an app for Apple. And that's the truth. And it's a travesty. So for me, you know, Agile was an absolute no-brainer because for me, it's about how do you harness and leverage that real creative capability that you have within your organisation, which typically is miles down your value chain, and you're just not leveraging it. Because believe me, these guys are very well informed, very knowledgeable, and know a lot about your organisation. So I won't go through the rest of it, but I could talk for weeks on Agile, I really could. And ITO, that's just our sort of process map, and I'm not going to go through that either. So I only show this because I took this into my annual review because I was quite pleased with it. And this, I suppose, just an indicator that this stuff does work. What this basically shows, and just forget the numbers as much as really the trends are important, that, you know, just going back to that concept of breaking the volume cost model. There's the sort of compound sort of cost reduction that we've seen from our technology costs, and at the same period, the business revenue growth that we've seen. And that is the number of severity 1 incidents that we've had over the same period. So it's absolutely possible to do all of these things without compromising other aspects of your operating model. The trick is just how do you sort of keep these things in balance? Do we do everything brilliantly? No. Have we got miles to go in a lot of areas? Absolutely. But for me, these sort of concepts works, and they are the future for technology. So really just to sum up, and I know this is not a heavy technology audience, but this is something that, this is a slide I use when I do talk to technology audiences, is that to me, from a CIO or a technology function perspective, getting the right platform, making it secure, making it flexible, virtual, efficient, and supporting what you do, to me, really accounts for about 20% of the success of the organisation. But it's incredible to me how often this bit here becomes the most important thing from a technology perspective. And this is a thing that people get really excited about. To me, they are purely enablers. And the stuff that really counts to organisational success from a technology perspective are all the things we've talked about here. That you have a customer orientation value proposition as a technology function. You're focused on the outcomes for the organisation. You have that tightly integrated vision. You work collaboratively. DNA runs through, innovation runs through your DNA, and you have that really, really strong technology focus. So I've covered quite a lot of stuff there, I know, in a fairly rapid period of time. So I'm sure some of you at least might have a question or two in terms of what I've talked through. So I'm happy to open it up to the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. How far down the track are you with those sort of, I know you've talked about back the concepts and so on. to engage your customers, they're not all going to come into a branch, although you might want
Yep.
to. How do you bring them in using that other technology?
So what you've got here in our sorry, I was flicking through here just to sort of demonstrate the point. So in our kiosks and in our High Point, which is the 24/7 one we just opened, we've actually got video capability to connect, for example, small business customers to a relationship business banker who is in the area but is not actually located at the same point. So so that's fundamentally where we're really pushing video, and it's also in our flagship store as well. It's not actually on any of these pictures, but we're using video here again for exactly the same purpose. Interestingly, when I spent some time in the States, and some of you may have heard of Umpqua Bank, they're sort of held up as being really innovative, really at the forefront of all things sort of sexy and interesting when it comes to physical distribution. We talked to them a lot about video, and what they've actually found is that they embarked on a process of kitting out all of their stores with video, and they're actually taking it out of an awful lot of them, because what they've actually found is that the importance of the individual demographics in each area really drive the effectiveness of video as a solution. Now, it's a statement of the bleeding obvious again, but how often do organisations think, video is really important, let's whack it in everywhere? But what they've actually subsequently discovered, in certain places it works beautifully and brilliantly, so they're really ramping it up. In other organisations, they're pulling it out. So we've, again, learnt the lesson from those guys, and we're trialling it in certain locations, and where it's working, we're trying to find similar locations where we can push it. We did trial it about 18 months ago for wealth referrals. It didn't work very well at all. Quality was a problem, customers got turned off, so we ceased it. So I think it's one of those things that will work, but it's a little bit like social media. I think it's just about finding the sweet spot as to how you can really exploit these technologies. And as a relatively small player, we haven't really got deep pockets, so the test and learn approach is very, very important to us.
I've been in the workforce for quite some time, and I notice there's two particular trends that have occurred. One is the growth in IT, of course, which is massive, and the other is a trend in moving away from offices, private offices, towards this open plan concept. And this is sort of at the opposite end of what you need people to do, I believe. Because you need people to focus for, say, 3 to 4 hours by themselves, get in the zone, so to speak, and come up with creative things and do some smart coding and some clever thinking. Yet we've taken away the actual device for them to do this. We throw them in with a bunch of people, collaborate, which is great. You need to have it at some stage. But you do need long stretches, I believe, of solitude or time away from other people just to think. We don't have that these days. They just jam, bums on seats as many as they can into a building. I noticed in your collaborative design there's no particular place where you can actually go hide and think in solitude. What do you suspect about that?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. So there actually are places you can. There are libraries in here, and there are sort of cubicles where people can literally shut themselves away from the world. They're not shown on the pictures here. In fact, I'm just trying to see whether you can see any of those on here. No, I don't think you can. But there are absolutely so if you wanted to go and shut yourself away and literally hide, for want of a better expression, there are thousands of spaces you can do that in this place. But I'll give you a counterpoint, which is really quite interesting as well. Because the freedom of choice is really important. It's not for me about forcing people to collaborate to drive innovation. If they do that best as individuals, go and find an individual space. But one of the interesting things that we found with our developers, and this is something that happens in Agile, is the concept of pair programming. So, and this is literally where two developers work on a single, either one machine with two screens. And it's a bit like, when we first started talking about that concept, it's a bit like asking Van Gogh and Picasso to actually, paint something together. Because, developers see themselves as very creative and very artistic, and they're very passionate about the code that they write. So they were very, very reticent about moving into that pair space in terms of, well, this is my code, I'm not sure I want to collaborate with somebody. But what we've actually found is quite the opposite, because now they've exposed themselves to that way of working. Whilst it was really, really uncomfortable to start with, those that have done pair programming are now insisting on doing that on every project they're working on. So I think you're absolutely right, it's not for everybody, but what we found when we've pushed the boundaries a little bit and exposed people to move out of their comfort zone, we've actually found a kicker, because people have said, oh, well, I do it a bit like this, oh, I never really thought about that. And people that have been a bit insular and a bit more introspective, as developers often are, we've actually seen some real success stories. But yeah, it's a really good challenge, and they were some of the change management issues we had when we first moved into the building. Great question.
Bernard, I think I can make my voice heard. Paul Layoff, Andy. I'm interested in the leadership aspects, and particularly in relation to leadership in a subsidiary organisation under the broader CVA banner now. How do you inculcate a leadership ethos under that umbrella where you're having to pay some attention or a lot of attention to Ian Narrov and what he's trying to do within that broader CVA leadership culture?
Yeah. Look, the answer is very easily, in our experience, because I believe we've got a fantastic relationship with our parent. You know, we are very integrated from a leadership perspective. We have a single leadership framework. I sit on Michael's leadership team. Most of my peers from the EC sit on the respective leadership teams of their functions within CBA. And to be quite frank, we believe in the same things. Yes, there's a scale difference, obviously, but fundamentally, we believe and are passionate about exactly the same things around innovation, around agility, around being customer focused, etc. So, but I know from my own experience and others' experiences in other organisations that is certainly not always the case. And I fundamentally think that comes down to how the relationship is established from the start. So I'd like to give you a a different answer, but that's absolutely how it is.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Eric's my name. I'm interested in the linkage between leadership and technology, and I think I'm going to get this right. I see the technology dimensions in two sort of parallels, if you like. One is internal, how are you going to apply that, and how you're going to drive that, and the issues about leadership internally, and then how are you going to drive technology outside the bank, i.e. the interface with your customer, a client group who, largely speaking, is probably rather nerdish, a bit conservative, and how do you demonstrate that leadership in terms of practicality? Is it by starting with particular segments of the demographics, if you like, of the population? And I suppose across all of that is a question I have for you. Are you being used by CBA as a bit of a cutting edge to test the market?
Where to start? Yeah, where to start with all that? Well, in terms of your first question, yeah, I'm sorry if this is going to sound sort of overly simplistic, but to me, I think people, particularly in technology functions, spend far too much time getting excited about the technology, and for me, going back to this thing, it's all about the customer and the user interface. So if we talk about the external facing, I'll go back to that iPhone app, which I know I keep going on about because it was obviously a great piece of innovation from one of our colleagues. But there are people in the organisation that said it shouldn't be built in this way, it should be built that way, and it should have this functionality or it should have that functionality. And to be honest, we could have spent 6 months over-engineering and over-analysing, you know, and customer focus groups and going on forever and ever and ever. The reality of that is from that person conceiving that idea to getting it live was literally 4 to 6 weeks. And in 6 months it had 250,000 downloads. And all of that app it's a reskin of our internet banking rendered to work on a smartphone. And that's 1 in 10 of our customers now has that and regularly uses it. So to me, it kind of is well, we've got 1.2 million customers, so it's, yeah. So effectively, I think that's a real ringing endorsement for me to the sort of just do it kind of philosophy. And if you can do that economically because you're really driving productivity, if you're spending millions of dollars on this kind of stuff, then clearly that's a big issue. But if you can find a way to do this economically and 25,000, what are you actually losing to give, you know, to have a go at this kind of stuff? And I think in doing it that way, you know, by focusing on the usability of these things and what the customer is actually looking for, or what the business problem that you're trying to solve is, I think you've got a greater chance of success. Because I think somebody mentioned earlier a lot of money being spent on technology. We're actually spending less on technology, comparatively speaking. And it's about getting the value add from the money, the investments that we actually make. as opposed to saying, let's just spend more and more and more. I think it's about getting smarter with your investments because, you know, at the end of the day, we're a small player. And then coming back to your other question about CBA, not especially. I think our parent are very, very innovative. I think the Kaching app is fantastic, and that's not something that was developed by us, you know, to sort of feed back into them. I think we share and collaborate a lot in the innovation space. They've got some very smart people, as have we. So we don't have anything like that kind of formal relationship to say we'll play around and give you stuff. It's very much sort of two-way. So I hope I answered your first question. I'm not sure I did, but it was quite a long one. Maybe we can have a chat over a beer.
Yeah, cool, thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah. Thanks very much, Andy. Gary here. I sense that underpinning your ability to change the momentum has been the change from waterfall approach to an agile approach, because otherwise any change that's conceived of is going to take a long time to get through and it's going to be wrong. So can you tell us a bit more about how long that process of changing from one approach to another took and what the challenges are that you had to get through?
I would say, without hesitation, that moving to Agile was the single most difficult thing I've ever done in my professional career. And I completely underestimated how difficult it would be. When I described it to you, doesn't it sound like a glimpse of the bleeding office, and so much common sense to get everybody together in the value chain from the start and just build what you need, build it quicker. It sounds easy. And somebody was explaining to me, I was really racking my brain on this because we were having so many sort of cultural challenges with it, and somebody was explaining to me that immigrants into Australia who had to reset their driving test have a higher fail rate than new drivers, like kids learning to drive. And of course the issue there is unlearning behaviours. And that's absolutely what we found with Agile. You know, there are people that have been very, very successful building new software, implementing stuff in a very regimented way, very successfully. You know, we won awards for it, you know. And here we rock along and actually say, sorry, the way that your world works is not right, we now need to do it this way. So that combination of people, you know, being resistant to the change, because they always will be, and unlearning behaviours and ways they've done things, you know, for in some cases 20 years, has really, really been difficult. So we had an aspiration to achieve 50% of our projects through Agile in 3 years. We won't achieve that, but we will probably be in the 20 to 30% space. And the one tip I would give to anybody thinking about going down this journey is just learn by doing it. Over-theorising it, you know, trying to rebuild your processes before you've actually done it, and then educate people and explain what, just do it. Make mistakes, and then you will learn, you will engage colleagues, they will get enthused by it, because the one thing that I could guarantee with Agile, everybody that works on an Agile project doesn't want to go back to waterfall. So getting that to spread virally by getting people to do more and more projects is now the strategy that we're on. And also bringing in more kind of believers from other organisations that have done it. But it's really tough.
I'm Gully from Henry Davis York. I can see that you're an early adopter of innovations from the global technology players. Just interested in your view on collaborations with the global tech players as well.
You mean sort of JVs, or you mean just?
Just working together on projects, bringing new technology, maybe not as formal as a JV necessarily.
Yeah, look, as I've hinted at a couple of times, we don't profess that we have all the answers, you know, and a lot of the stuff I'm sharing here, we work very closely with Cisco, you know, done a lot of work with them, and some other sort of providers who sort of we love to kick around ideas. You know, I've mentioned that we've spent time with IINet, other sort of financial service institutions. Obviously, we use our parent a lot. You know, we feel good quality conversations with anybody, whether they're part of our group or elsewhere, really stretch the thinking. So we haven't gone down any formal sort of JV routes, but we absolutely spend a lot of time talking to third parties. Not everyone. Ones that we really feel have got a good cultural fit with us, because inevitably a lot of vendors are are obviously looking to drive revenues from conversations, and what we prefer is actually good quality conversations to understand our business, help us understand what's going on in the industry, and for us that will lead to business opportunities as opposed to, you know, so it's a kind of a yes and no answer. As I say, we've got some smart people, but you know, by crikey, we have not got all the ideas, and you know, the emerging stuff that I talk about here hasn't come from us. You know, this is what's happening elsewhere in the industry.
Andy, this.
Perhaps the last question. Andy, you paint a picture of of what Bankwest customers can experience today in terms of the innovation we've brought to bear. Could you paint a picture, perhaps, of what the Bankwest customer experience will be in, say, 10 years' time?
I think the simple answer to that is no. I'll have a go in the couple of years, and the reason I'm saying that is that not that I don't think I'm sort of smart enough. You know, I think anybody that would predict outside the sort of 5-year horizon would be a very brave person, given the rate of change. But
I thought the 10 years would give you a bit of advice and
yeah.
Imagination more.
Yeah, look, for me, the key to me is that we talk about SO-LO-MO a lot, which is social, local, and mobile. And I know other organisations have used sort of similar terminology, but for me, that really sums up, I think, how I think the relationship between customers and financial institutions will go. So one of the things that we've done recently in one of our projects is it's kind of contrary to where the industry's gone. We shut down one of our call centres, and we actually routed all of that, and it was our sales call centre. So we shut it down completely, and we routed all of those sales calls out to our store colleagues who were local to where the customer was calling from. So as a customer proposition, and I won't ask the question, but I think I'll get more hands than maybe when I ask the social media one, is who likes to phone a call centre and, you know, talk to somebody that's, you know, lucky if you're in the same continent. Thank you. Whereas a proposition where you phone up and say, I'm interested in your credit card. Oh, hi, it's Andy here from the City Beach store, knowing that you're calling from City Beach, I think is a very, very powerful customer proposition. And equally, our click-to-chat capability, which we've gone live with, so if you're on the internet and you're going through an application, people hover over a question for so long, a click-to-chat box will pop up and say, we notice you're hovering over this question, would you like some help? Click here and we can have a chat. All organisations are doing that, but I tell you, most organisations, when you click and you have that chat, you're talking to somebody a long way away. Now to us, click to chat, and again, you're talking to Andy in City Beach, and I can pop round and see you if you like, or we can meet up for a coffee, we believe is a real winner in terms of a customer proposition. So I know I've kind of got a couple of examples there, Peter, but for me, I believe driving the sort of the mobility, the social aspect, and the local aspect with customers from a technology perspective is really where I think the future will go. You know, it's about reconnecting with the customers, and that's the part that technology can help to play, whether it's routing traffic, whether it's integrating channels, whether it's making it easier for people to connect. The other thing we've done recently, we're actually piloting scrapping the IVR. So we don't have an IVR. So for certain of our lines, so you ring, you pick up, and you speak to somebody. Hey, and I know I'm not going to ask that question because I know all the hands will go up in the room in terms of whether you think that's a good proposition. So for me, I know there's nothing particularly sexy in that answer, but for me, that's what it's all about. I think if you can crack using the improvements in mobile and connecting people socially on a local basis, I think that's a real winner in financial services. And I think technology will just help make that easier and easier and easier.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Before I close up, is anyone else got a burning question and really want to ask? Last chance going once.
Is this the end of cash?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
10 years?
Yeah, I'm on film, aren't I? It's diminishing, absolutely diminishing. You know, will it disappear? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but it obviously will diminish. You know, talk about the Starbucks example. You know, 0 to 20% in 6 months. That's pretty scary, so I think it's inevitably going to diminish. There's no question. But you know, as to will it be removed by this point? Yeah, I think that's a tough one.